Welcome to Mom Enough Live. I'm Erin Erickson here with my mom, Marti Erickson, and our guest today, Lisa Woititz. So Lisa Sue Woititz. Lisa is joining us today to talk about the intergenerational impacts of addiction and paths to recovery. And she will be sharing her story and sharing some wisdom with all of us today. So we're thrilled to have her. And we're also so grateful to Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation for being a supporting partner of Mom Enough and for making guests like Lisa Sue Woititz available to all of us to share their wisdom and get that important information about the disease of addiction out into the public so we can all do our part to support those we love and care for who are struggling with the disease of addiction, or if we are struggling ourselves, that we can get the support we need. Lisa and her mother, Janet Woititz, are the authors of several books, including Unwelcome Inheritance and the seminal addiction recovery title, Adult Children of Alcoholics. And I know from many of the patients that I work with that is a very popular book and has been referenced over and over again over the years. Janet was an early leader in the movement that made Adult Child a household name. After Janet passed away in 1994, Lisa continued to manage her mother's Institute for Counseling and Training for a number of years. Lisa has worked in the mental health, substance abuse, and criminal justice fields for years, and most recently was ordained as a chaplain. And I know the chaplains that I've worked with are just so wonderful, and they play such an important role. So I love that you have pursued that, Lisa, and we're so thrilled to have you here today with us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here, and thank you for being an example of what I am trying to show the world, is that families can recover and together make an impact and help other families.
Absolutely.
Well, that certainly is key to our work, and I just applaud you for what you and your mother were able to accomplish together. And it's always a wonderful thing to learn about another mother-daughter pair also who have taken on the task of working together toward common goals. I want to talk a little bit about your backstory and you and your mom. And of course, as Erin said in her introduction, your mother was the author of several books, including Adult Children of Alcoholics, which is really one of those classics now, and also was one of the early pioneers of the term adult children of alcoholics, as well as the ACOA Association. So really operating on lots of different levels. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how her work shaped where we are today in the recovery movement in general. I mean, we've had so many new developments in recent years and in recovery, and also in the kinds of challenges people are facing with various addictions. But your mother's work, and then yours as well, really have been a continuing force. So tell us a little bit about your mom and about how her work shaped.
Yeah, well, there's a lot going on now, and there was certainly a lot going on back then. My mother, I guess, in a nutshell, sought to create the help that we needed. She, in an effort to empower herself to leave my father, who was a very high-functioning, brilliant, but however, very low bottom and violent alcoholic. She went back to school at night to become a therapist and then to work on her doctorate. And the subject of her doctoral thesis was self-esteem in children of alcoholics. And really all born out of her concern for her own children and her belief that we would grow up with certain difficulties because of what we were living through as children. And her colleagues said, they'll grow out of it. And they kind of scoffed at her. And she said, no, they're going to grow up with it. And so she started to write about it. And pretty much it seemed like overnight. There was a lot of work that went on, but it kind of caught on all at once, it seemed. And then, the message was out. But what I can add to that now is the fact that although my mother has always received all of the accolades for being the catalyst for this movement, it was really born out of my father suffering with alcoholism. And I can say that today, and my father just passed in April. So I'm in a full circle time in my life where I'm very happy to report that change is very possible, and there is a full and complete healing possible for anybody that wants it. If two people want it, they can have it. And so whereas my father was somebody who I always, I wished he would get hit by that bus, by the time he passed, he was not that person. He was a transformed human being, and our relationship was transformed as well. And so by the time he passed, I can say really, he was my best friend.
Oh,
Oh,
So,
what a powerful story. Oh my
yeah.
goodness.
and that didn't make it into Unwelcome Inheritance yet, because the book came out in 2015.
Yeah.
Aha. So
do
you have a new
addendum.
addendum that you're working on? Oh, I'm sure. Well, and what a statement that is about how things evolve over time, and the hard work of recovery and the potential for change. I just am so grateful to you for telling that personal
Thank you.
story, and
Yeah.
I'm sorry for your loss. And
Thank you.
I know those losses are really hard when they've been such complicated relationships.
Very.
Sometimes people think it's harder if you've had this, really almost perfect relationship. Not that there is such a thing,
Yeah.
but I think when there has been complexity such as you and your father went through, that can be even harder. So
That's a great point. And I love that you say that, because I really want to encourage people to kind of get on with it, because tomorrow is not promised, and it's much easier to make peace with somebody that's here on the planet, and it's a lot harder to find peace in your life if that person has passed on, and so that in-person experience isn't a possibility for us anymore.
Yeah, it's so liberating, I think, to find that resolution before you lose someone.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, it's much more abstract when someone's no longer with us. It's much more ambiguous in kind of processing and making peace when you can't do that with the person. And so I'm so glad that you and your father got to that place, and what a beautiful message of hope. Because I think for so many families, especially when they've been living with this for years and years and decades, it's sometimes hard to hold on to that. And I love that story because it's possible, and it can happen. And there are so many amazing resources and so much research coming out about new ways we can support people. And of course, amazing organizations like Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation that are doing so much work really at every stage of development to help families with the disease of addiction, and then their children's programs. And so there's so much great work that is happening. And yes, and to, it's like, I love that you shared that piece about your mom saying, no, my children are going to grow up with this.
Yes.
And we do carry these things with us. And the idea that we're just going to let it go and get on with it is just, it doesn't serve anyone. So I think that's such an important message. Now, I want to come to the title of your book, Unwelcome Inheritance. Can you speak to us a little about the unusual inheritance some of us receive?
Well, we didn't ask for any of this. We're born into this very difficult and many times traumatic life. And some of us, and there are studies that will show, some of us are already beginning to become traumatized in the womb, right? And I do believe that there were problems in my household before I was born, and that my mother was, struggling a lot when she was pregnant. So there are a few components to it. First of all, there's the circumstances that we are born into. There's also the biological component. There's a body chemistry here that for some of us just doesn't quit. It is this very highly sensitive, very highly allergic body chemistry. And so that really plays, and highly addictive, right? Susceptible to addiction. And we know also that there's a hereditary component to addiction. So there's all that just coming out of the gate. And then there's also the behaviors and the dynamics, the family dynamics that are passed down through generations. And it's all very subtle. We don't think about it in a bigger context, because many of us kind of live in a vacuum. We feel that our struggles and our day-to-day life is just about us. And we don't necessarily see ourselves in terms of a bigger picture, a bigger story that began long before we got here. So there's that behavior where we don't know how to communicate in a healthy way, for example, or the consistency that you see in a healthier family that knows how to talk to each other, knows how to solve problems, isn't afraid of anger. In my household, if somebody was angry, that meant an ambulance was going to show up at some point, right? And so if you think about how that unfolds over your lifetime, that translates into behavior that is avoidant, that pushes things under the rug or smooth things over, and that sort of thing. So there are all sorts of behavioral dynamics that get passed down as well. And there's the impulsivity, and the biggest problem, which my mother saw way back when, is that low self-esteem. We feel as children that if we were better kids, or if we hadn't been born, none of these problems would be happening. So there's this whole big ball of wax here. And for a lot of folks, they're spending years, decades, most of their life trying to sort it out. So I'm hoping to help speed up that process.
I think too that there's such a hypervigilance that develops in a lot of children who are growing up in homes with addiction, and where and it relates to what you said about feeling that if you only hadn't been born, or if you were only being a better child, that the problems would go away, and so you're really blaming yourself for creating this. And I grew up in a home where addiction was not the issue, but there was abuse on the part of my father, and a dynamic between my mother and father that was very unhealthy. And my dad could be really explosive, among other things. And I just remember as a young child, trying to be so perfect and so quiet and so respectful. But, nothing I did, no matter how hard I tried, it couldn't change that volatility that was in him. And I learned over the years a lot about why he had those patterns and where some of the, really pathological kinds of issues came from. And that helped me to also have, a kind of rapprochement or a little bit of, a resolution of some of those issues with my father. It was far from perfect, but I was there. We were together throughout his life, and he died I guess it's been a little over 10 years now, 11 years. Time goes so quickly, but I just remember that feeling of hypervigilance, and how much effort it took to kind of hold on to that. So
right. And so that's something that we had to do. We really are very good at staying on that pulse of the energy in the room. Yeah. Nobody can read the energy in a room like somebody who grew up with alcoholism or another addiction or a similar dynamic. So many people relate to this work. Right. Yeah. We can walk into a room and know if there's something negative happened there an hour ago. Like, we just know it. So we do have that hypervigilance. And you said, while you were talking, I heard my mom kind of pop in. And I can hear her saying, when you're talking about, accomplishments and trying to be perfect and being the best in all things. And I heard her in my mind saying, and yet it's never enough.
Yeah, exactly.
No matter how accomplished you can be, you're still not enough.
Yeah.
Right.
Amen to that.
And that's not okay. Right. We all need to know that we're worthy and that we have so much to offer. And a lot of us, like myself included, have made careers out of being crisis managers. We learned a lot of skills.
Yeah.
And so
Yes,
we know.
I did too. Yeah.
And so we know how to serve and help other people in very nuanced ways
Mm-hmm.
that might not be available in other places. So that's why I really want to push people along to get into their recovery by serving, kind of healing it backwards instead of talking about this anymore, because we've been talking about it for forever, right? To kind of put the story aside, right? And begin to let go of the resentment toward our parent or parents or whoever
Yes.
it was. Well, I'll say it this way. Many times we're holding on to resentments because our life isn't working now, right? If only my parents hadn't done this, I'd be able to have a successful marriage, or I'd be better off in my career, or I'd have friends, or I wouldn't feel so awkward all the time. If not, and if we can actively make changes in our lives so that we move through and begin to resolve those problems, there's nothing to resent anymore.
Oh, that's
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so wise.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of where I'm going with all of this, kind of thinking outside the box.
Erin and I talk about the need to revise our narratives. And, a lot of times what that means is realizing that that early narrative of what happened to you in childhood is a part of the narrative. And it's not about denying that or pushing it out of the room,
Right.
but it's only part of the narrative. And whatever age you are, whatever point you are in your life, whatever circumstances you're living in, you have an opportunity to continue the narrative in a different way. And that framework is helpful to me in thinking about that in terms of my own life journey, but also, the many parents and people who are dealing with intergenerational cycles of abuse and addiction and mental health problems and so on. I want to ask you about what has changed since your book was released. And what year was that released? You
2015.
said 2015, yeah. And and you've already talked a little bit about what has changed in your life in terms of your reconciliation or resolution of some issues with your dad, and of course his death, which is a big loss. But how have you changed or grown since you wrote that book? And what do you think the implications of that are for other people?
Wow, that's a great question.
It's a big one.
How have I changed? Well, I'd like to think that, well, first of all, I also, right after my book came out, I lost my big brother. My big brother died like 3 months after. And and I just want everybody to know that between 1994 and 2015, my brother Dave was the person who was instrumental in keeping all the work out there.
Wow.
Okay. Because I can do email, you know what I mean? But he was really like his heart and soul. And so I lost my brother and I've lost my father. And in the meantime, I also became a chaplain, as I mentioned, and also a hypnotherapist. And the reasons why I've done these things is because I need to continue growing, and I need to continue to, I guess what I'm trying to do is to go through this process from the inside out, so that I'm not asking anything of anybody that I don't really know about.
Very smart.
Yeah. And so I've really been focusing on my own growth and trying to solve this whole thing. But I think aside from that, I have really, maybe it's because I'm in my 50s now, getting to that place where I am feeling comfortable in my own skin. I feel that all of the things that I have been thinking about and teaching about and everything that my mom taught, I feel that I feel very well healed and in a good place to share a message of hope from where I really am inside.
Oh, that's
So I don't know if that answers your
for you.
question, or there's a
That's perfect.
Yeah,
That's perfect.
I love that. And I think what a wonderful model you are for other people you're working with, that just that power of that inner healing. And I love that you mentioned the hypnosis, and I'm trained and use clinical hypnosis in my practice as a nurse practitioner, and it's been so powerful as a clinician in serving my patients, but also the benefits of just doing that with people is quite profound as well. I also wanted to come back to something you said earlier that I think is really powerful, and it's something I've talked to my children about a lot. Is I think we can easily get into a kind of being the victim or a role of victimhood, and especially when we've experienced significant adversity and we feel like, all these things are kind of working against us. And especially people who have had significant adverse childhood experiences. And so my older son lost his mother. He's not a biologic child. He lost his mother. And yeah, obviously that's a very significant loss and adverse childhood experience. And so often, I think when people have experienced these things, it can be easy to get into that kind of experience of not really feeling like you have control over things, or all these things are happening to you. And what we've talked to him a lot about, and of course I talk to all my children about this, is that when you blame other people and other things for your current circumstances, you give all your power away. You have no power in that situation then. And so you get to reclaim your power when you take responsibility for what's happening in your life right now. And we don't have control over everything we experience. We don't have control over the families we're born into or the experiences that we have in so many cases. But we do have control over what we do with that right now. And I think that's a much more empowered place to be. And so it's been really interesting to kind of see how that message plays out and see, my children, where they start to take accountability. I mean, even for minor things, that it's a much more empowered place to be, and that you can say, I'm going to set a boundary here. I don't want to be a part of this thing, or I need to do this to move forward in a better way. And so I think so much of what you were describing too is that, like, yes, we carry these things with us. Yes, we carry these hard times or these tragedies or whatever it is that that's with us in some way. But what we do with it, we do have control over.
Yes, we do. Yeah. Yeah. It's not that it's fair. None of it is fair.
No,
The
it's
fact
not
that it
fair.
happened, it shouldn't have happened, and it's not fair that it happened. And but when you talk about taking our power back, it's a much more powerful position to say, I'm in a unique position to help somebody else because of the depth of my experience.
Yeah.
Right. And by the same token, I can't help another person past my place of healing either. Right.
Exactly.
So for me, that is the most powerful use of my life.
Yeah.
Is to be in my purpose and use everything, use it all, for good, use it all to serve.
Well, what I often say to my patients, they'll share things that they're newly aware of. And I say, maybe it's a painful or hard thing that they're aware of. And I'll say, what's so wonderful about the fact that you're aware of that now is you can change it. We can only change what we can see. And so even if it's a painful thing to see or a hard thing to recognize, we can change it because we can see it. But if we're not aware of it, we can't do that. And so your story is such a wonderful example of that you've recognized all these things, you've done all this deep work, and now you're showing that light to other people. So I really love that.
Thank you.
It's really beautiful.
I'd like to just add that, it makes sense to avoid pain. And when the depth of the pain that you really have to address, when it is that kind of depth, it's not something we really want to do. But I just want to encourage anybody that is avoiding going through that process to know that, once you start that process, it goes from this feeling of avoidance. This is my experience, is that I began to avoid less and kind of get this attitude of bring it on. let's get this, let's do this, let's get it done, and build on those accomplishments.
Yeah.
Building the self-esteem that we didn't have.
I want to add one thing about what you're saying, Lisa, about avoidance, and it comes from the research on intergenerational cycles of abuse and neglect, child abuse and neglect. But that's entangled, of course, with all sorts of issues around addiction and mental health and other sorts of intergenerational family dynamics. But what we've seen in research, and this was my focus of my major research at the University of Minnesota and my decades there, was that women who had been abused in their own childhood and now they're becoming a parent for the first time, if they have denied and avoided their own pain and continue to do so, they are also more likely to avoid their child's need for comfort and their child's need for connection, because they have learned to kind of block those emotional needs in themselves. And now, even though they may really love the idea of becoming a parent, they may love their child, but they kind of take those defense mechanisms they've used to protect themselves from facing the hardest pain, and they use those same defense mechanisms on their child. So, well, I'll just kind of, be a little more distant, and I won't respond when my little boy cries. I'll just let him tough it out and learn to be strong. You need to be tough to get along in this world. And so that's really a key to what you describe about not holding on to that avoidance and denial. Is really key to breaking intergenerational cycles of negative parenting of all types, really.
Right. I mean, it sounds like
huge.
Exactly. Yeah, very much. I mean, it sounds like almost an example of perpetuating the cycle when you intend to do exactly the opposite.
It is. And that, that's been the thrust of most of my practical applied work with parents all around the world. I mean, I'm almost 77 and I'm still working in Austria and Germany and Ireland and, keeping this work going because it feeds my soul and it also supports me in my ongoing journey. I mean, even at this age, I still see things I need to change and become more aware of. But seeing parents at that time when they become a parent for the first time, especially, really come to grips with that in a supportive context, both with professionals who really know this journey and also with other people in the groups we have as a part of our preventive intervention program that has been the core of my work. But I just think that point is so important, and you're talking about it from a slightly different context, but really not very different at all. Really helps us move on.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, what are some of the disconnects in a family that experiences addiction, and how can family members navigate these challenges?
Okay. This is actually this is something I spend a lot of time thinking about, and I'm in recovery myself, so I'm in meetings and I'm just always observing. And one thing that I see a lot of that really concerns me is the disconnect between I guess an alcoholic parent and their child or partner. And on both sides of it. So there's on the child side of it, or the adult child side of it, is this lack of understanding that this other person is very likely evolving also, right? And holding them accountable as that person that they were in the rearview mirror, right? So there's that. But on the other side of it, this person who is, and I'm speaking of the context of somebody in recovery, their response to their children or adult children or partner is, look, I stopped drinking. Like, what do you want from me? What else do you want from me? Not understanding the other experience. So, for example, like by the time psychiatrists say that between 0 and 8 years old, that's kind of when your foundation, your nervous system is kind of, set up. Right. So by the time I'm 8 years old, I've been like plugged into an electrical socket. right, for 8 years. There's no way to get and so my life unfolds from that place. There's really no way to explain that to my father, for example, right? In a way that he can really understand. So that is a huge disconnect just in understanding the experience of the other person. And I see that that causes a rift that sometimes can never be addressed in a meaningful way. That's probably the biggest one I see.
Yeah, and I think that it's like people often have the idea that it's like, oh, the substance, once the substance is no longer in the picture, that's
Exactly.
all that needs to happen, and that's not the full picture. And
No, because the family feels like the whole world revolved around you while you were drinking, and now it revolves around you while you're in recovery because we don't want to upset you and we're walking on eggshells, and now it's all about you in recovery. And when do we ever get a chance to be? Right. And to be understood? Where's the part where we talk about what I went through, and how you can make it right? And the truth is, we can't go backwards and fix it. Right. Which is why we talk about a living amends. And there's so much to be said for that. I can't fix the mistakes I made back then, but I can be the best me for you going forward. So.
And I'm thinking about how you, as a professional now, I mean, you described for us in several ways how you're living this still and how you have your whole life. But I think about that importance of empathy, and for the person in recovery or actively, when they're actively using, this is going to be very unlikely, but certainly in recovery, if they can really put themselves in the skin of the people they've affected. I mean, not just thinking in a kind of abstract or logical way about the harm they've done, but what's this person experienced, in the deepest way, and how can you meet them there? And that's really making amends, is if you can take time to not talk about what you did wrong, but to listen to what the person experienced from it, and then to really feel that and sit with them in that. And I think that's probably the hardest of all to do, because those patterns of kind of self-absorption that often are a part of addiction, and I mean lots of other problems in our world as well, that's really hard to step out of. So
You remind me of a story of a friend of mine who was trying to make amends with his 3 children, all adults, and he wanted to give them each a copy of my mother's book, Adult Children of Alcoholics. And I said, I really think you should read it first, because when they read it, they're going to get really mad at you. When they understand, that's why I'm struggling in this. Once the light bulbs start going, they're going to be really mad at you. Anyway, he gave it to them anyway, and then they got really mad at him.
and I hope he dealt with it, and they were able to move through to a healthy resolution.
Yeah.
Oh,
well,
boy.
sometimes anger can be the seed for future positive change. If we get it out there, we can discuss it, and if we can develop the skills we need to process anger, it's I think there's, like, you think about even just in parenting, and we talk about mom enough, like, mom enough isn't about never yelling at your kids, or never, I mean, obviously it's best not to, but we all have our moments, and with anything, I think we can kind of get into this like idealized vision of what recovery and healing and all of that looks like. And it doesn't look like not having arguments. It doesn't look like not having anger and frustration. It looks like having all that and finding new ways to deal with it that are healthy, and using, healthy supportive behaviors to support everybody in moving forward, and to support each other. And so I mean, the very essence of what we're doing at Mom Enough is about being enough, not being perfect. And that requires being real about all of these things. And I mean, I joke with my kids all the time, like, oh, you can talk to your therapist about that someday. It's like we're all doing things that are creating challenges for our family members and our children. And so if we can acknowledge that and find healthy ways to have those conversations and use nonviolent communication techniques to process things and share what we're experiencing, then we can move forward. And
we're doing our best.
We all are doing our best. So
and to appreciate that we are all, like I said earlier, we're all part of a bigger picture. So I can look at my father, I can look at my mother, and I can see them in the context from where they're coming. My father wasn't just this, this bad guy. He has a story too, and the more I flesh out the story and humanize him, I think to myself, I can see how he became who he was. I can see how I became who I am.
Yeah.
So it's the big picture.
With my father, I saw things that helped me understand how amazing it was that he wasn't worse than he was. I mean, really, that he had some strengths, that he had, lots and lots of needs, and came from a family with just extraordinary challenges. I mean, I won't even begin to go into them because they were so kind of overwhelming. When I step back and look at them, I've been writing a memoir recently, and when I look at what my dad grew up with, it just is staggering to me. And he did amazingly well in many ways. But I just think that you're describing having a kind of empathy for the person who you also blame realistically and reasonably for a lot of the challenges that you've had to grapple with in your 50-some years. So, but I have one last question that I want to ask you, and I know we're really at the end of our time here, but I think this is an important question to ask you so that our listeners can hear your best response to this. And that is, we hear a lot of people say things like, I've been a part of every group, I've read every book, I've tried every therapy, and I still feel lost, no matter what your age. What am I doing wrong, and where do I go from here? So how do you help someone in that space, or what would be your words of wisdom to people who are listening and watching today and maybe are in that space?
Well, first of all, I want to tell you that I hear this every day. Every day I get an email or a note from somebody that says, I've been in therapy for 20 years. I still want to kill myself. Or I've been going to self-help meetings for decades, and I feel just as terrible as when I started. Like, what am I doing wrong? And so what I have to, and so what I say, and what I want to explain is that in my work, in my family's work, I'm the head cook and bottle washer. It's just me. Okay. As opposed to, well, not as opposed to, but in addition to, there are a lot of self-help groups all around the country. And they do a lot of good for a lot of people, but there are limitations. And so one thing that I really want to explain is that my mother's philosophy, and mine as well, is that our healing is largely an educational process. That we were raised with this lack of a database. How do healthy relationships happen? What do they look like? What does a healthy family look like? How do I relate to people? How do I take care of myself? How do I handle situations that, that I feel that are out of control? All of these questions. How do I do laundry, right? Think, what am I supposed to expect from other people? All of these things, we have this lack of a database. And so it's an educational process where there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And as my mom would say, an occasional tune-up, right? And she would also say that being the adult child of an alcoholic, or wherever you come from, is not a disease. And the self-help groups that are out there are following the disease models of AA and Al-Anon, etc. Being the adult child is not, it's not a disease that we're in remission from. It's a fact of our experience that we need to process and heal and move forward. So like I said, we can help all of the new generations that need help. So when I say to people, you don't have to go to meetings. It's like you could hear a pin drop. They can't believe I'm saying this. My mother would also ask, can you relate to people other than around your pain? You've met wonderful people along your journey, right? Your therapist and your people in your groups. You've met wonderful people. Go to the movies, have a party, go out and have some fun, live life together. We don't need to talk about this anymore. The story. I don't let people tell me their stories. When I do a retreat and everybody wants to tell their story, it's like they don't know what to do with themselves, because I say, you don't need that anymore. It's not serving you, right? So that's where I'm going with this. And like I mentioned before, the whole idea of getting into our healing so that we can actively healing, so that we can help the next person.
Yeah. Oh, what a wonderful
Beautiful.
and wise advice. And because the story, can become our current existence if we can't move past that, or it's not even move past it, but if we can't add to that with other things, it's like people whose whole identity is about this tragedy or that experience.
Right. Like, do we want to spend the rest of our lives healing from our childhood?
No, definitely not.
Let's find joy. That's what I hear when you say, go to a movie, go have a party, and I think whatever our trauma or adverse experiences in our childhood were, it's finding joy. And then if we are parents, having a way to help our children find that joy, find that together. Because if it's all just about, remembering and then sort of wallowing in a way, which is what it's very easy to do, especially at times when things in your current situation might be a little challenging too. So you revert back to that role. But I just love the joy that I heard in what you said, and that I saw on your face as you said it too. So that's hugely important.
It is. Well, the human brain likes the negative, unfortunately. So we sometimes have to work to, build more of the positive. And what a hopeful message. And really, your whole story, Lisa, is such a beautiful story of hope and recovery and healing. And we're so grateful for your time and your wisdom today, Lisa Sue Woititz, author of Unwelcome Inheritance. And we're also incredibly grateful to the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation for creating the space and the opportunity for this discussion today, and for bringing so many wise people to the table for us to share with our audience. So thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for tuning in and for your thoughtful comments, and know that this recording will be available indefinitely. And so we will make sure to share that information as well. And thank you to everyone today for tuning in. I'm Erin Erickson here with my mom, Marti Erickson, and we are mom enough, or at least trying to be mom enough. And
still trying,
yes. And we are so grateful for you tuning in today. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.